Thank you.
So after that game, you had two guys basically say that they were kind of looking ahead, not living in the moment as you kind of like your guys to do. How big of a concern is that, and what do you do about things like that?
I think they're young kids, and I think a lot of people do in life. You start to try to see a little bit farther down the road than you do. Hopefully, you learned a lesson from it that you got to be where your feet are. And that's something that we all learn from all of our trials and tribulations. That I think it's important that you stay in the present. We continue to talk about it as a staff, and we continue to talk about it with the team, and guys understand that. But it happens to most people. So it's just something that you got to do, and you can't do that against a good football team like Utah. You got to stay in the present when you're playing Utah. That's a lesson that we learned right there. So.
Dorian, when he's facing direct pressure, seems to run straight back a lot. Is that what he's supposed to do on those plays?
No, I don't see that.
You don't see that? You don't see him running straight backward when pressure's coming?
I mean, on a particular play, if the pressure's directly up the middle, I think he has to avoid it. But I think he's done a really good job of keeping a lot of plays alive and doing different things. There's times when he makes mistakes doing it, but I don't see a constant that every time there's pressure, he runs straight back. No, I don't see that at
all. Okay. Looking at Slovis this week, he's had a phenomenal freshman year. He almost doesn't look like a freshman the way he plays, right? I mean,
yeah, he's got great poise. He seems like he's got a really good understanding of what they're trying to get accomplished. And he's got a real good clock in his head in terms of when the ball's getting out. He can keep the play alive. He's not trying to run back there, but he's trying to keep the play alive and let his receivers work and try to get open. And I think he's done a really good job. He's when you watch him on tape, he looks like he's got a really good grasp of what they're trying to teach over there.
As a defense, how do you kind of disrupt? Tyler Huntley had a pretty good, efficient game.
How do you different offense,
right? But how do you try to disrupt a guy like Slovis?
Well, I think it starts with the combination of both the pass rush and the coverage. It's not just one over the other. You just can't say we're going to play coverage all the time and then let him sit back there for a while and try to pick you apart. And you also just can't all out blitz them every single play and then hope that you got everybody covered because they got some really good weapons at receiver. So you got to change up the looks that you get. You got to disrupt the timing of the routes. You also have to try to disrupt him and get him off his spot and not let him get comfortable back there in the pocket.
You mentioned the receivers. How big of a factor in that is that, do you think, in his success? The quality of the receiving core he has?
Well, I think they've got a great design in terms of what they do, and they're obviously as talented as a receiving core you're going to see with Pittman and Vons and Brown, and Drake London's doing a really good job as a true freshman in there. So they've got more than one option. I think the running backs complement the four wides that they play. They're a lot like Washington State, and they're a four wide receiver offense. You're not going to see a lot of tight end out of them, but you're going to see some really talented receivers that you can't allow the quarterback to have a lot of time back there to throw because those guys are good enough to get open, and the longer the time you give them.
When you went back and dissected that game film and looked at Dorian's turnovers, what did you see there? I mean, were some of those?
There's not one common thread to each turnover. So.
Yeah.
I think one's a low ball carriage, and the defender got a hand on it. So where the carriage is of the football, you got to be up with it. Another one was the defensive lineman slide, and they were in a zone pressure, and we picked it up, and the nose guard looped around. He's throwing the ball out to the fullback, expects it to be picked up, but the ball got tipped by the defensive lineman that our offensive lineman should have been on. So that wasn't on the quarterbacks. All of them are different.
What about the one where he's just cocking his arm back? That's just a
ball slipped out of his hands.
And then the one into the end zone. Did you think that was a good percentage throw on his part to kind of a jump ball?
We don't grade him by percentages there, but I think when you're throwing the ball up to a 6'4" tight end, then that was wide open. You got to go up and get the ball. It's a one-on-one contested catch. So I don't think of that as a poor decision on his part. And I thought again, there's an example of a time where he got flushed in the pocket and didn't go straight back. So you can look at that one and take a look at where he scrambled from that standpoint. Did a great job of keeping the ball alive. And if Devin goes up and makes that play in the end zone, you're like, what a great play. That's the ESPN Sports Center play compared to how the quarterback played on that one. So.
You've said that practices correlate to having good games. Do you feel that you guys had a poor practice last week?
No.
And how do you focus?
No, I think, again, let's first and foremost give Utah credit. That's a good football team. And I think you guys all try to say that we don't control everything that happens in a game. And there's two teams that play in the game. So I think you gotta do that. You could have the best week of practice, and if the other team has the best week of practice, then then it's a matchup between two teams that have really good weeks of practices. So I think you got to look at it from that standpoint. I think you got to give Utah credit. So I think our guys have practiced really well. when we get towards the game time, as we talked about with the players, and the players understood that we got to stay in the moment a little bit better. We didn't do that. I think that's one thing we can control, and we continue to work on that this week.
With the result that came about, do you think that there will be a little bit more focus from the team this week?
Yeah, I think anytime you win or lose, you're trying to move on to the next opponent. So, we're not going to spend a whole lot of time. We just got done watching the Utah film and move on to our next opponent. So our opponent this week is USC, not Utah. So.
USC is one of the worst teams in the country at covering kickoffs. Would you look at that and see that as an opportunity to be a little more aggressive in that?
No, I think we look at where the kick goes and where the ball lands, and that's where we make all of our decisions on when we return kicks and when we don't return kicks. So, that's where you're factoring in. Where's the ball placed? How does it work? Where does the ball land? If you look at our team, most people do returning the ball against us. They don't, because JJ kicks the ball out of the end zone. So you got to be able to look at where the ball's kicked, where the ball's placed, what's the hang time with the ball, what's the type of deployment that they use down the field, and those are the things that factor into the decisions that you make. You don't just look at the stats and say, hey, let's do this.
Are you preparing for the game any differently, knowing the rivalry between the two schools?
No, we prepare for all of our opponents the same way. We respect everybody we play. We've always gone by respect all, fear none. And, we know it's a really good team. It's a really well-coached team that's got a lot of players that we have a real good knowledge of, just because we've been around here, and our players have played against most of each other. Most of the cool part about this game is that most of the guys on the field will have played against each other, sometimes as teammates, and then other teams as opponents in the high school ranks. So, but you don't prepare for this game differently than you prepare for any other game.
Just to follow up my last question, but they have coverage breakdowns that are consistent. Would that factor into your decision about whether you're
they don't.
Fair catch?
So when you look at it, that's not what you look at when you break down the film. There's not a consistent breakdown that number 3 never makes it down the field, so let's run the ball at number 3. So there's varying factors in terms of when you look at how they cover kickoffs. That's not to answer your question. No, there's not one breakdown that happens all the time. So let's run the ball left at number 3 because number 3 never makes it down the field.
Last question.
What can you say about Joshua Kelly? Utah only allowed 2.3 yards per carry, but he had 4.1. What can you say about him?
Josh is just a really talented running back that we know. He's kind of the guy you can count on week in and week out, no matter who the opponent is. And I think he's a tough, hard-nosed, physical runner that you watch him run through some tackles on Saturday, and that's kind of what you expect out of Josh, because that's the running style that he has. And he did that last year for us against all of our opponents that we played. And he had a decent year. He did a decent game against Utah last year. When we played them, broke a long run for us for a touchdown. So that's kind of what you come to expect out of Josh. It's comforting to know you have a guy like that in the backfield, because he's durable, he's physical, and he's usually falling forward when he has the football. So that's kind of a credit to what Josh has done, and we've known that for 2 years now. So. Thanks, guys.